thanks very much. Let me just say a quick word on Kamala Harris, and then what I mainly want to focus on is the International Criminal Court. Um, but first, with Kamala, I mean, I think it's quite clear at this stage what she's going to do, and her acceptance speech at the convention illustrated this. She will speak out strongly about the suffering of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and she will reiterate how the Biden administration is pressing hard for a ceasefire to try to curtail that suffering. She will not touch the big issue before her, which is whether the US government would restrict arms sales or military aid as a way of pressing Netanyahu to accept one of the ceasefire offers that's on the table. And the one exception to that has obviously been Biden's willingness to stop sending these awful 2,000-pound bombs to the Israeli military, which were used incredibly indiscriminately with devastating effect throughout Gaza. But apart from that, Biden is not taking that step. Kamala will not take that step. She's going to try to get by saying, I hear you're suffering. I want a ceasefire to end it, period. Now, she's calculating, and I'm not sure she's wrong in this respect, that when push comes to shove, people may not be happy with this, but to either abstain, to just not vote, or to vote for a third party is effectively to vote for Trump. And, especially if you're in Michigan. And that a vote for Trump, if Trump were to prevail, will be so much worse for Palestinians than if Kamala were to prevail. And I think, I actually agree with that. So I think it would be a mistake not to vote for her, even though this is an opportunity to press her to take on the arms embargo issue in particular. Now, what I wanted to address a bit more fully is the International Criminal Court, because the issue now has been joined. The court has heard from both sides and is likely to issue a judgment relatively soon whether to affirm the prosecutor's request for arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israeli Defense Minister Gallant, and the one remaining Hamas leader who has been charged, Sinwar. I want to put forward basically the four arguments that have been made for why the court should not affirm the arrest warrants for the Israeli officials, and just address each one of them. And I anticipate that the court's opinion will have to do this. Now, one which I don't know that any government is actually actively pressing, but has been sort of lingering in the background, has been the US government's view that the court should not exercise what's known as territorial jurisdiction. That is to say, Israel never ratified the court's treaty, the Rome Statute. The only reason the court has jurisdiction is because the state of Palestine is given a jurisdiction. And the US government for many years said it's inappropriate to prosecute somebody from a country that hasn't joined the court just on the basis of this territorial jurisdiction. That's an argument it made in Rome more than 20 years ago, and it lost overwhelmingly. Only 6 other governments voted with us, one of them being Israel. It still was the US position for 20 years until the US abandoned that position because of Ukraine, because the court's charging of Putin was based on that same territorial jurisdiction. Ukraine had conferred jurisdiction, Russia never joined the court. It's the exact same thing as the situation of Israel, but Biden said this act was justified. Even Lindsey Graham, who was, the South Carolinian Republican senator, one of the leaders from the Republican Party with respect to international or foreign policy, he's embraced the court. He said, Ukraine has changed our view. And so the US government has basically abandoned its objection to territorial jurisdiction. Even today, it's not explicitly putting that forward. So I think that objection is off the table. Now, a second objection, which the US government is asserting, and it seems Germany is asserting, is to say that Palestine is not enough of a state to confer jurisdiction on the court. And, obviously, Palestine is not a full-fledged state, but the UN General Assembly has given it the status of a non-member observer state, which has been deemed enough for Palestine to ratify a series of human rights treaties, including the Rome Statute of the ICC. And frankly, we should welcome that. It reflects a commitment to respect human rights, even though that commitment often falls short. But this has been paralleled by a growing number of governments that have recognized Palestine as a state. And indeed, it would be sort of ironic if the ICC were to say, Palestine isn't enough of a state because Israel continues its illegal occupation, even though the International Court of Justice just said that occupation is illegal. So I think the idea of the court rejecting this state argument is I think it will reject the state argument. The pre-trial chamber already did by vote 2-1, close vote. But now that it's being reconsidered as a contested matter, I still think the likely result is saying that Palestine is sufficiently a state to confer jurisdiction. Now, an alternative to this argument, and here, various governments are arguing this, is that even if Palestine is a state, it gave up its rights to prosecute anybody under Oslo. And if you look at, the Oslo Accords, they indeed say that, Israel takes charge of prosecutions. But the recent International Court of Justice opinion about the occupation cited Article 47 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which very appropriately says that in a situation of occupation, nobody's rights can be bargained away. Even an agreement between the occupying power and the occupied power to abandon certain rights cannot be recognized. And that makes sense because, there's a complete unevenness and imbalance of power. You don't want, an occupied power being coerced into giving up rights. And so the Oslo Accords, this section having to do with, with who gets to prosecute, I think the ICC will say that that is not enough to abandon the rights to prosecute, that that's what Article 47 of Fourth Geneva says. So I don't think that that argument is likely to prevail. Now, the final argument put forward, and this is being by Germany more than anybody else, is to say that the ICC has what's known as complementary jurisdiction. That is to say, it's not the primary jurisdiction. It only is supposed to step in if the national power in question is unwilling or unable to investigate and prosecute conscientiously. And what Germany has said is that it's unfair to expect Israel to be investigating the charges that have been put forward, basically Netanyahu's and Gallant's starvation strategy in Gaza, because the war is ongoing. And it's unfair to expect Israel to investigate itself during a war. So just wait. Don't issue the arrest warrants now. Wait until the war is over with. Now, I don't know a military prosecutor anywhere in the world who would buy into that argument. Germany didn't even advance that argument when it came to Putin. Obviously the war in Ukraine is still going. Germany never said, Russia can't be expected to investigate itself because the war is ongoing. This would just make a mockery of humanitarian law, saying you only enforce it after the fact, you don't enforce it during the armed conflict. So I think it's very unlikely that the court will endorse that theory. All the more so because Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor, twice visited the region, was very outspoken that his top priority was the siege, the blockage of food and other humanitarian aid. And, one, he wanted it lifted, but two, there is no indication that the Israeli government launched an investigation. Indeed, to this day, even after Netanyahu and Gallant have been charged, there's been no public announcement of an investigation. So in essence, this would be, just an endorsement of doing nothing, an endorsement of impunity. So those four arguments, I think none of them is going to prevail. And I expect the court will systematically reject at least the last three. I'm not sure anybody would even dare put forward territorial jurisdiction as an issue. But that's how I anticipate it will go. I hope we see the result sooner rather than later.